Good morning. This is for students in BUS1104 for my Monday class to get you guys caught up to where the other classes are going to be. And because we missed the Labor Day Monday, I decided to record the remainder of Chapter 1 to try to get everybody back on track. So I'm going to pick up where I left off last class, talking about managerial tasks and functions. And you may recognize this slide. So let's start taking a look at these tasks and functions in a little bit more detail, one by one. The four managerial functions are essential to a manager's job, and the relative importance of each changes with the manager's position and where they are in the company. The higher they go, the more important one element becomes over the others, and how well managers perform these functions determines the effectiveness and efficiency of the overall organization. So we're going to begin with the planning stage. And remember, you're already doing this in your own lives to some degree. Management in business is getting paid for doing it, but also for doing it well. So planning is the process used by managers to identify and select appropriate goals and courses of action for an organization. And all organizations, regardless of their size or their profit objective, they all need to develop a plan. Effective planning is at the very core of good management. In fact, the performance levels of organizations are evaluated on their ability to plan and to plan well. We want to do business with businesses that do well, and businesses that do well plan to do so. To plan effectively and efficiently, these steps should be followed in order. So we have 5 steps in the planning process. From 1 to 5, we have deciding which goals an organization will pursue, analyzing the organizational environment for threats and opportunities, deciding which course of action or strategy to adopt, deciding how to allocate organizational resources to implement the plan, and then evaluating whether the strategy achieved the goals. So let's take a look at each one of these things separately. First, let's step back for a second. Good planning determines how effective and efficient an organization is. It also helps managers to determine determine the strategy of the organization. The outcome of planning a strategy or developing a cluster of decisions about what goals to pursue, what actions to take, and how to use resources to achieve that goal. Basically, it's developing a game plan to achieve the desired outcomes. So let's take a break from business right now, and I want to check out how you're doing in your life already. Sorry about that, my cell phone is going off. I'm just going to put that on silent right now so it's not happening anymore. I apologize for that. So let's take a break from business and get back to what you guys are doing in your own life in these 5 steps. Now, number 1, deciding which goals the organization will pursue. Well, by being here today, listening to this lecture, you've already decided to pursue the goal of attending college. Next, you weighed the pros and cons of getting a job and working, or taking some time off from full-time employment to go to school. Then you applied for the program and have set your own schedule. You decided on whether or not you were going to be a full-time student to reach your goal or a part-time student to reach your goal. You figured out how to allocate the resources that you have available to you, money, time, energy, information, in order to be able to pull off your dreams of post-secondary. And then at various checkpoints throughout the semester, test dates, assignments, midterms, final grades, you're going to evaluate what you've planned, whether or not what you've planned to do is working or whether or not it's failing. If it's working, you just keep trucking along. If it's not, you may need to develop a new plan. So let me ask you, was making the decision to attend college an easy decision or a hard one? Well, your answers may vary. For some, it was a no-brainer. You were just going to go to college because that's what you had always decided you were going to do. For others, there were a lot of factors to consider. The reality is, planning is never really easy, whether you're planning your life or making plans for the company you own or work for. There are countless options or directions you can go in, and sometimes it's not immediately clear which plan is the best to follow. Planning is tough, and it's tough because of the uncertainty and the risks involved. And then choosing the right strategy also presents some risk because there's always the possibility that we might fail, either in whole or in part. But the bottom line is, somebody has to make decisions, right or wrong, and do their best to make it work to achieve the desired outcomes of the organization or of the person themselves. Next, we're going to move on to organizing. So managers create the structure of working relationships between organizational members that best allow them to work together and achieve goals. The key here is that managers bring people together so that goals can be achieved. This is tough, since managers must deal with people, and to add to that, the goals are always changing. And trust me, we all know that people are sometimes not very easy to deal with. These people are grouped into departments according to the tasks that they perform. So some examples of tasks within businesses are marketing, finance, production, accounting. And managers will also lay out lines of authority and responsibility for the members within these sections. This depicts how workers report to managers through the firm, and it's also called an organizational structure. And this structure is the outcome of organizing. So again, managers will group people into departments according to the tasks that they do within the organization. And then what they do is they figure out who reports to who and what each member is responsible for. We have to coordinate these things because we can't have everybody working towards the same thing. Everybody in the organization has to work towards some small individual goal to help support the big picture. Next, we take a look at leading. And as it says on screen, leading is articulating a clear vision, energizing and empowering organizational members so that everybody understands what they're doing and why they're doing it. Leading is a critical function of management. So think to yourself for a second, what are some of the great leaders that you're familiar with? And in your opinion, what makes them great leaders? To be considered an effective leader, you have to use the skills of power, influence, persuasion, and communication very, very well. Why is that? Well, you have to be able to coordinate the behaviors of individuals and groups so that their activities and efforts work in harmony with each other. And you also have to have that leadership quality, that communication ability, to motivate and encourage employees to work at a higher level than what they might already be working. You have to make them want to work fantastic instead of just meh, good enough. Think about this. If you clearly understand what you're doing and why you're doing it, you'll naturally do a better job, right? Managers have to state a clear vision for employees to follow, and they also have to help employees in attaining those goals. In your textbook, they use examples of high-performing organizations like General Electric or Campbell's Soup as examples of great leadership. But I don't think you really need to look that far. If you work right now, or you've worked in the past, you've had a manager. And there are probably some of them that you would move heaven and earth for. You would do anything for these managers. Others, they could crawl across glass and beg you to do something, and you'd still find a way to say no. Why do you suppose that is? Well, the answer is really easier than you might think. Anyone can be promoted to the position of a manager, but few people have what it takes to be a truly great leader. The really great thing about this is that leadership skills can be learned and perfected with a lot of work and determination. Now we get to the fourth function of management, which is controlling. And in controlling, managers evaluate how well the organization is achieving its goals, and then they take corrective action to improve performance. All organizations run into the expected, or mistakes get made. Managers have to be prepared to first identify the problem that exists and then correct it. How do they do that? Well, they watch, they monitor individuals and departments and the organization as a whole to determine whether or not those goals are being met. The controlling function has to accurately measure performance and then determine whether or not that performance can be improved. And this task is done at all levels of management. The outcome of the controlling function is the accurate measurement of performance and regulation of efficiency and effectiveness. So control involves 5 different activities. We're going to get into this in a lot more details in Chapter 10. But the things that I want you to know about right now are the fact that we put these control mechanisms in place as managers because we want to have ways to measure performance and compare what we're doing now with what we want to do in the future. We have to be able to identify changes in those standards and investigate the causes of those changes, and then finally take action to get ourselves back on track. Controlling and planning are really closely linked. Planning establishes goals and standards for performance, while controlling helps us to ensure that performance towards those goals is being achieved. This control process also helps managers deal with problems arising outside of the organization. So next we take a look at the types and the levels of management. And as I've mentioned before, nobody starts at the top. In order to be a really effective manager, I highly encourage you to start at the bottom, because that's where you're going to learn the most. There are two ways that organizations differentiate their managers: by level in a hierarchy and by the type of function that they perform. So first we're going to take a look at their level or rank in the company food chain. There are 3 levels of managers. There are the first line managers, the middle managers, and then the top managers. So first line managers, as it says to the left here, are responsible for the day-to-day operations of an organization. They're going to supervise and coordinate all of the non-managerial employees who get the work done within an organization. So for example, a head nurse in a hospital would supervise all the other nurses, PSWs, and other workers within their area. Middle managers are next, and they supervise the first line managers. And they also have the added responsibility to find the best way to combine human and other resources to achieve organizational goals. Middle managers have their finger on the pulse of an organization because they're close enough to the action to know how things work, and also to provide great insight into ways of improving effectiveness and efficiency. They also evaluate whether goals that the organization have set out are appropriate and whether or not they're achievable. So some examples of titles that middle managers would receive would be things like human resource managers, marketing managers, sales managers, operations managers. And then finally we have top management. And they're responsible for the performance of all the departments. And they have responsibilities that span across all levels of departments within the organization. They carry out the organizational vision. They establish the goals, like what are we going to sell and what services are we going to provide. And they decide how departments should interact, and they monitor how well the middle managers are doing their jobs. Ultimately, top managers are responsible for the success or failure of an organization. Some examples of titles that top managers would receive would be CEO, Chief Executive Officer, CFO, Chief Financial Officer, CIO, Chief Information Officer, and so on and so on. The CEO creates the top management team, a group of managers including the CEO, president, and the department heads most responsible for helping achieve organizational goals. Next, we take a look at managers by the functions that they perform within an organization. So we take a look at the bottom of this pyramid. And you're going to see that most organizations will group managers into different departments based on their skill sets or their job-related skills, basically because they all perform similar duties or use the same skills or knowledge to perform their jobs. So examples of departments would be those that you see below. So Human Resources Department, Research and Development, Operations, Accounting and Finance, Sales and Marketing. Within each department lies the 3 levels of management: first line, middle, and top management. The higher the manager's position, the more time they spend on planning and organizing, and the less time they spend on leading. I'll show you that next. So let's take a look here. As managers move up the ladder, they spend more time planning and organizing resources to maintain and improve organizational performance. Why? Because they're responsible for more things within the organization. See, the first line managers, they take care of the people that are below them, just the regular employees. So that means that they naturally spend less time planning and organizing and even controlling because they spend the majority of their time leading. As you move up to middle management, you'll see that things start to even out a little bit more. And top management, well, top managers will spend the majority of their time planning and organizing, maybe a little bit of leadership and controlling, but here's where they spend the majority of their time. The lower a manager's position, the more time he or she spends leading and controlling first-line managers and other non-managerial employees. So this slide has a lot of writing on it, and it's meant to basically answer the question, so what exactly does a manager do anyways? Now, I'm not going to go ahead and read through all of this because you guys can do that, and you can actually find this right in your textbook as well. I'm just going to move on to the next slide, which talks a little bit about the functions of management in a little bit more detail. So, restructuring. That's a scary word. We know that everything changes. No matter what it is, no matter where it is, everything is always subject to change. And some of the functions that management performs are staffing. And staffing changes happen as a result of restructuring or downsizing. So staffing is seen as an additional function of management, and it's hiring people to carry out the work of the organization. Not one of the four main functions, because sometimes we have human resource departments to do that ourselves. But in smaller organizations, you'll find one manager doing all the four functions of management, including staffing. Staffing requires recruiting people for positions within the firm and determining what skills are needed for specific jobs, how to motivate employees and train them to do their jobs, how much to pay them, what benefits to provide, and how to prepare employees for higher level jobs in the firm at a later date. Now, sometimes we need to engage in staffing because our organization has been restructured. So we've made the decision to simplify, shrink, or downsize our organization's operations to lower costs, as many companies do in times of recession and or dramatic change that occur with mergers and acquisitions. What's a merger? Well, a merger are when two companies come together and partner up, making one kind of super company. And an acquisition is when one large company buys a smaller company, brings it into their organization, and that smaller company kind of disappears completely. See, when that happens to you, when your company gets bought by another company, there's automatically restructuring because, if you go back to this previous slide, all of a sudden, we have 2 human resource managers, 2 research and development managers, 2 operations managers. We don't need that. That's a duplication of work. So to make things better, to simplify and make things efficient, we restructure. That also involves downsizing, which is the elimination of jobs at different levels of management to improve efficiency. Downsizing, unfortunately, can lead to low company morale and customer complaints about service because we used to have 15 people doing this job. Now we only have 3. Naturally, it's going to take longer. So I'm going to throw this out to you, and this is actually the question that I'm going to begin our next class with. Is restructuring a company evil? Is it necessary? Or is it a necessary evil? Be prepared to answer that question when we get back together on Monday. Moving on, I want to talk to you about values and attitudes on managerial behavior in an organizational culture. Now we know a little bit more about how managers manage, their areas of responsibility, and how the flow of information and authority moves throughout an organization. The effectiveness of a manager and their ability to manage staff, their responsibilities, is often affected by their personal values, their attitudes, their moods, and emotions while on the job. You need to remember that managers are people too. And as people, they bring all the same baggage to the workforce and the work site that we do as individuals. We try not to, but it does always happen. So let's start with some basic definitions, and then we're going to get into each of these in more detail in the following slides. And this section will help you to understand how managers behave, how they treat others, and how they can help or hinder a company's success. So first, we'll look at values. And values describe what managers are trying to achieve through work and how they think they should behave. So it's sort of like, what's my vision of what a manager is supposed to do? Because I want to try to behave like a manager. Next is an attitude. And attitudes capture thoughts and feelings about a specific job and about organizations. So it's the way that we kind of feel about something when we approach it. And then moods and emotions encompass how managers feel when they're managing, while they're actually doing their job. Now, I love this quote at the bottom. And I always include this because it's just so incredibly important. Instead of waiting for a leader you can believe in, try this. Become a leader that you can believe in. Makes a huge difference. Let's take a quick peek at values. Values, attitudes, and moods capture how managers experience their jobs as individuals. So let's explore a manager's values first. To go back to what that definition was in the previous screen. Values describe what managers are trying to achieve through work and how they think they should behave. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, this should be a no-brainer. But remember that people have different opinions or understandings of how managers are supposed to behave and what exactly they're supposed to do while on their jobs. We can see that a manager's impressions or beliefs can be affected by two kinds of personal values that come into play: terminal values and instrumental values. So a terminal value is a lifelong goal or an objective that an individual seeks to achieve. These can be things like, I want to have a sense of accomplishment in my life, or something that's really important to me is equality or self-respect. These are values that we hold to be true, and they directly affect how we work for and with a company, because these are the values that we consider to be our end game or our main objectives or goals to achieve. The example in your text is a really great one. A manager who has the terminal value of a sense of accomplishment focuses on making a long-lasting contribution to the company and looks at the big picture or long term. Whereas a manager who values equality might focus on making the workplace a more inclusive atmosphere. It's important to note that terminal values often lead to what we call norms, the unwritten, informal codes of conduct that dictate how people should act in particular situations. These norms, although largely unwritten, are considered to be really important by most members of a group or an organization. So I'm going to bounce to the next slide, and then I'm going to come back to this one afterwards, because I really want to show you terminal values while we have that concept in your mind. So terminal values might affect the way that you manage your workforce or your workplace. So if your terminal value, your end game, your ultimate goal is to live a comfortable and prosperous life, then your main focus might be ensuring that you make a comfortable living or doing what you need to do to get a raise to keep your job secure. If your terminal value is a sense of accomplishment or making a long-lasting contribution to the organization that you work for, then this might motivate you to gain a fancy title of like executive manager. If your terminal value is a world at peace, a world that's free of conflict, then you'll avoid workplace conflict or try to mediate really tough, sticky situations and try to fix it so that everybody comes out a winner. So I want you to take a second to think about your own set of terminal values. Can you relate to any one or even a few of these? And if so, how do you think that would affect the way you do your job if I suddenly placed you in a management position? Now, let's go back to that previous slide and talk about the next kind of personal values that can affect how you approach a management situation, and that's instrumental values. So instrumental values are a mode of conduct that an individual seeks to follow. Some examples provided in your textbook include behaviors that we believe managers or even workers in general should possess. Simply, it's a way of behaving. We believe that workers should have things like ambition, open-mindedness, responsibility, self-control. And these instrumental values are really important because how we view these things actually affects our behaviors while on the job. So for example, if we value creativity, then we're going to look for the more outside-the-box solutions to problems rather than a straightforward approach. If we value honesty, then we look for and insist that we and all other employees behave ethically. So we're going to move ahead 2 slides now and take a look at the instrumental values that most managers hold dear. So here are some instrumental values on screen right here, and see if any of these appeal to you. I want you to figure out how these instrumental values might affect the way that you behave in the workplace. So if your instrumental value is helpfulness, then you might go out of your way to assist those in need, customers or even employees. If one of your instrumental values, the ways of behaving, is intellectual, you like intelligence, then you might actively seek constant information and take advantage of every learning and training experience that's put in front of you. If one of your instrumental values is self-control, then you as a manager might be really hard on people who lose their temper or lose their cool while on the job. Milton Rokeach is the researcher that identified the terminal and instrumental values that we've seen in figure 1.6 here. He found that if you rank the 18 terminal values and 18 instrumental values in order of importance, it'll reveal what he calls your value system. Your value system is made up of the terminal and instrumental values that form the guiding principles in your life. And as a manager, these value systems provide the fundamental guides that will affect your behavior and efforts at the 4 functions of management: planning, leading, organizing, and controlling. And when you have a couple of moments in the near future, try it yourself. Rank each of these from the most important to the least, and it'll reveal a lot about your own personal values and provide you with some insight on what your value system is. I'm going to take a little drink. My throat's getting a little dry here. All right, next we're going to take a look at attitudes. So how many of us at one point or another have been told to change our attitude? Yeah, my hand is way up in the air right now. Most of us have been led to believe that attitude is a verb, a behavior. Like if we're snappy or grumpy at somebody, then we have a bad attitude. Well, an attitude is actually a collection of feelings and beliefs that ultimately affect the way that we behave. They're not the behaviors themselves, just the things that affect the way that we behave. So let me give you an example. Let's say you're trying to decide where to go with a bunch of friends on a Friday night. You want to go to a dance bar, but your friends want to go to a coffee shop, and you get outvoted. So you pout and go along with them, but you determine that there is no way that you are going to have a good time because coffee shops suck, no matter what. Well, that's an example of attitude affecting behavior. You already decided, based on your feelings and beliefs, that a dance bar is way more fun than a coffee shop. So therefore, you behave in a way that determines that you will prove what you believe. The coffee shops are just no fun. Managers have attitudes about their jobs and their employees, and these attitudes can affect how they approach each task or situation. If you believe that creating quarterly reports are awful, terrible things, then the task will be painful. If you believe that an employee is lazy, then you will always see them as lazy. As a manager, your attitude comes into play most relevantly in the areas of job satisfaction and what we call organizational citizenship behaviors, or OCBs. So job satisfaction is our collection of feelings and beliefs that we as managers have about our current jobs. If you have really high job satisfaction, you most likely love your job because it has a lot of features or characteristics that align with your value system. Remember those terminal and instrumental values? Your job or your business atmosphere kind of matches up with those. If you're a top-level manager, you want your middle and first-line managers to have really high job satisfaction because satisfied managers are more likely to go the extra mile for their companies or perform more OCBs, or organizational citizenship behaviors. Now, OCBs are behaviors that aren't required of an organization or of its members, but these are things that contribute to and are necessary for organizational efficiency, effectiveness, and competitive advantage. They are the above and beyond behaviors that most organizations will recognize and reward. It's also proven that managers who are most satisfied with their jobs are less likely to quit. In fact, you might not even consider quitting. However, disgruntled managers are always looking for their way out. These OCBs are things like staying 15 minutes late after closing to help out because you know that that's kind of the thing that you want to do, even if you don't get paid for it, or showing up early, or bringing ideas or proposals to your job or your boss in order to make things better or more efficient. Those are organizational citizenship behaviors. That's the above and beyond stuff that's not necessary, but makes for a way better workforce. So it all comes down to the level of organizational commitment. And this is the collection of feelings and beliefs that managers have about their organization as a whole. Managers who are committed believe in what their organization is doing and what they are doing within the organization to contribute to the bottom line. As it says in the definition on screen, organizational commitment is necessary for efficiency and effectiveness and a competitive advantage. So you can take a look and try to figure out what your own organizational commitment is in figure 1.8 in your textbook. Now let's move on to moods and emotions. So again, I want you to remember that managers are people too. And just like you and I, they go through life experiencing different moods and emotions. And yep, sometimes they don't do a great job of separating personal from business. So moods and emotions encompass how managers actually feel when they're managing. Research suggests that the subordinates of managers who experience positive moods at work may perform at somewhat higher levels and be less likely to resign and leave an organization than employees of managers who don't tend to bring a positive mood to the work atmosphere. This also plays a really important role in the way that we make ethical decisions. So a mood is a feeling or a state of mind that can be positive or negative. Remember, moods are temporary in a sense because they can last a couple of hours or they can last a couple of days, but they're never permanent. So when people are in a positive mood, as it says on screen, they feel excited, enthusiastic, active, or elated. Emotions, on the other hand, are really intense, and they're relatively short-lived feelings, and they're directly linked to whatever caused the emotion. There are many things that can affect our emotions positively or negatively. Praise from a superior, an unexpected compliment, or a flash of a really great memory. All these things have a direct trigger on how we feel in the moment, but will usually kind of subside once some time has passed. However, sometimes these emotions will hang on and ultimately affect our overall mood in some way. Good managers really need to be in tune with their own moods and emotions, but also with the moods and emotions of their employees and the organization as a whole. Generally, positive emotions and moods are signs that all is well, and if nurtured, can lead to greater productivity, greater creativity, and greater efficiency. Negative moods and emotions can have the exact opposite effect, leading to drops in productivity and efficiency, making just a miserable workplace. The ability to read a situation, its moods and its emotions and attitudes, falls under the category of what we call emotional intelligence. Sometimes we can read people really well. Like we'll walk into a room and we'll know right away whether or not someone is receptive to our ideas or whether we should even approach them. If you're in tune with people like that, you may have a very high level of emotional intelligence. It's the ability to be able to understand and manage one's own moods and emotions and the moods and emotions of other people. If you're highly emotionally intelligent, you have the ability to understand and manage your own moods and emotions as well as those of others. You get why people are feeling the way that they are, and you have the ability to help them work through it. Rather than blast people for how they're feeling, you take the time to figure out why they're feeling that way. And this speaks volumes to your ability to relate to people, ultimately making you a better manager. If you've never heard the term emotional intelligence before, and you kind of want to know where you would rank on this, you can go on the internet, and in a search engine, you can type in emotional intelligence IQ test, and there are literally thousands of free tests that you can take right now to figure out where you rank on the scale. If you rank lower than you think you did or think you should have, then there are ways that you can improve your emotional intelligence, and most of those quizzes will lead you to resources to help you do that. Next, I want to talk to you about organizational culture, and I did mention this at the beginning of this section. Organizational culture reflects the distinctive ways in which organizational members perform their jobs and relate to others inside and outside of the organization. Essentially, it's the personality of the business that we're working with. And everybody has a personality. Some have more than others. Companies are the same way. So to reiterate, a company's overall personality is referred to as their organizational culture. When people belong to the same organization, they tend to share certain beliefs and values that lead them to act in similar ways. It's kind of neat how all this stuff comes together. And it all starts with the terminal and instrumental values of management. Why? Because these terminal and instrumental values expressed and exhibited by management becomes the norm. Remember that term? Organizational culture is a shared set of beliefs and expectations and values and norms and work routines that influence how members of an organization relate to one another and work together to achieve organizational goals. The stronger the culture of an organization, the more one can think about it as being the personality of the organization because it influences the way that the members behave. So organizations differ in the way that members relate to each other, how important decisions are made, people's willingness to change, whether they're flexible or whether they're rigid. It plays a part in innovation, and it also plays a part in playfulness. For example, Google has one of the most famously unique organizational cultures out there. This is a company that receives more than 2.5 million applications a year for a reason. Let that sink in for a second. 2.5 million people put their resumes into Google each year because they want to work for them. Google employees work at a campus and receive the following benefits. They get free breakfast, free lunch and dinner, organic and prepared by a chef, free health and dental care, free haircuts and dry cleaning, nap pods. Yeah, you heard me right. You can actually take a nap at work. They have gyms and swimming pools, and yes, they even have doctors on site. Does this cost Google a fortune? Absolutely. But so does high employee turnover, which is the very nature of the tech industry. See, smart managers know that a founder's personal characteristics often play a huge part in determining organizational culture. And as a result, managers will create and foster a culture that aligns with the owner's terminal and instrumental values. It's called the ASA, or Attraction, Selection, Attrition Framework. Simply put, when founders of new companies hire new employees, when they attract new employees, they tend to hire ones that match up closely to their own personalities because they're likely to stay with the organization due to increased job satisfaction. So we attract people by the vibe that we put out or the personality that we put out. When we are selecting employees, we try to find people that really match up with our personality as an organization and even as a business owner or a CEO. Why do we do that? Because we don't want to lose our employees through something called attrition. We want to try to keep the best employees that most greatly align with our company's personality for as long as we possibly can. That is the ASA framework. Will that be on a test? Absolutely. So moods and emotions, as we know, can be contagious, and managers have tremendous influence over the general moods and emotions exhibited in the workplace. So shared terminal and instrumental values, again, play huge, important roles in organizational culture. Terminal values signify what an organization and its employees are trying to accomplish in the long run, and these instrumental values that we have guide how the organization and its members behave in order to achieve organizational goals. A little bit more about organizational culture. The military has a boot camp. Disney has a rigorous training program for its new cast members. Cambridge College had an orientation day for you. Organizational socialization is the process by which newcomers learn an organization's values and norms and acquire the work behaviors necessary to perform jobs effectively. Essentially, it's training you on what's expected at work and what the important things are so that you understand coming into this what's expected of you. There are more than a few ways that the socialization process is achieved. So I'm going to give you these examples, and then I'll give you examples maybe from your life that you may have experienced or maybe will experience in the future. So the first thing is a ceremony or a rite of passage. And this can be a formal event that recognizes incidents of importance to the organization as a whole or to specific employees. Rites of passage determine how employees enter and advance within or leave an organization. And companies should be developing socialization programs to prepare employees for these different stages of employment that they might experience while they're there. So a rite of passage would be something like an induction or a basic training, or maybe a college orientation. We do this because we have to learn how to internalize norms and the values of an organization. When you move into a new position, even if you move from a junior manager to a senior manager, there's usually some kind of training involved, a rite of passage that marks you moving from junior manager to senior manager. Next, we have a rite of integration, and these things build and reinforce the bonds among organizational members. These are bonding exercises, things like company picnics, office parties, retreats, and they're what we call team building activities. We get to know people on a much deeper level than just I work beside this person. And this is done in an effort to build common norms and values. So for example, we're still in the middle of Frosh Week, and there's a bunch of different activities that are out there. We had the activity day, the carnival day, that was outside last week with the rock climbing and the barbecue. These are ways to get you guys talking to each other and meeting each other, to build common ground between you and your fellow students and the people that work in this building and work with you. Then finally, we have the rites of enhancement. So rites of enhancement let organizations publicly recognize and reward employees that have done exceptional things. And this strengthens the core values of the organization and encourages others to do the same. These would be things like company awards, promotions, news releases, retirement parties, things along those lines, all of which reinforce an organization's values and norms. This might be a student award, or if you get a 4.0 grade point average at Cambrian College, you're recognized with what is called a President's Letter, because that's no small accomplishment. We also have stories and language and material symbols as well, and you can learn more about those just by reading into the rest of Chapter 1. They'll go into a little bit more detail. So let's put all this together. How does culture affect managerial action? Well, we're going to look at all the 4 functions, and then we're going to compare an innovative culture against a more technical culture. Do I advance? No, I don't yet. Sorry. I'm going to go back to this. So let's start with planning. An organization with an innovative culture is likely to encourage lower managers to take part in the planning process and develop a flexible approach to planning. In contrast, top managers in an organization that has conservative values are likely to emphasize formal top-down planning or include lower-level employees in planning or decision-making. Lower-level employees know their role and they're not really a part of this stuff. So would you rather work for a company that involves you in the planning process or one that just says, this is how it's going to be, do it? The next function of management is organizing. Managers that have a really innovative culture are likely to try to create an organic structure or one that's sort of flat. There's not too many climbing up the corporate ladder situations. And authority isn't really all that recognized because people share authority. Everybody's placed on an equal level, so that employees are encouraged to collaborate and find solutions to ongoing problems. In a conservative or a more rigid culture, levels of authority are very distinctly identified and there's no room for change. I'm your boss, you're my employee, that's it. Leading is what we look at next. And in an innovative culture, managers are likely to lead by example, encouraging employees to take risks and experiment. They're supportive, even if employees succeed or fail. In contrast, managers that exist in a conservative culture are likely to develop a rigid management by objective system and constantly monitor their employees' progress towards goals, overseeing every single move. You're not encouraged to have your own thoughts because they just want you to do what you're told. So organizational culture, the actions of management, and organizational performance are all closely linked in business. almost towards the end, folks. There are 3 skill sets that managers need to perform effectively, because nobody is born a manager. And the skills that we've been talking about so far all take time and practice to perfect. Formal education, training, and experience, they all help good managers become better managers. And to acquire these 3 essential types of skills, conceptual, interpersonal, and technical skills. And the level of skills that a manager needs depend on just how high up the pyramid they are. Sometimes it's hard to find out the real problem in a situation. Conceptual skills include the ability to be able to analyze a situation and distinguish between cause and effect. Conceptual skills allow a manager to see a bigger picture or see beyond a current situation and consider options based on knowing what the long-term goals of this organization are. Top-level managers need to be the highest level of conceptual skills because they're responsible for planning and organizing within a company. So how can you develop better conceptual skills? Well, you've already taken the first step. Formal education, business training, and on-the-job training can provide new managers with the conceptual skills that they require to become top-level managers. They've even developed softwares like total quality management systems, benchmarking tools, and other tools to provide additional training and conceptual insight for managers to be able to see the bigger picture more clearly than ever before. Interpersonal skills are next, and this includes the ability to understand, alter, lead, and control the behavior of people and groups. Basically, this is people skills. The ability to be able to communicate, to coordinate, and motivate is the principal difference between effective and ineffective managers. Every person needs to develop these skills, regardless of their position in the company. Feedback on performance from superiors, peers, and subordinates allow managers to develop their human skills like conceptual skills. Excuse me. These human skills can also be learned and honed. Leadership programs are great ways to develop your skills in these areas. A good manager is usually a people person. That is, somebody who likes to work with others. Then finally, we have technical skills. So these are job-specific knowledge and techniques, and these specific kinds of technical skills depend on a manager's position in the organization. Don't be fooled by the term. Technical skills can encompass everything from accounting to marketing to sales and customer service. To be an effective manager, you don't have to be an expert on everything. However, you do have to know enough to be dangerous. That is, you have to know enough to be able to troubleshoot and help solve problems. The example they provide in your textbook is a great one. A restaurant manager may need to know how to cook, perform basic bookkeeping or accounting actions, administer payroll, and how to deal with customers effectively. They're not using all these skills all the time, but they may need to pull them out when necessary. For example, it's often lower-level managers that can best see a problem because they're the ones that are closest to the action and they have the greatest understanding of the entire process. Now, most managers begin their career in a given area. You, as students, will major in these areas and will branch out based on your skills and your experience. So effective managers need all 3 of these skills, and the absence of even one of these can ultimately lead to failure. Now, without getting into more detail on this one, I want to draw your attention to this final section of the chapter. And this is Mintzberg's managerial skills and roles. To be very clear about this, these will be on a test. And I'm going to leave this up to you to take a look at Table 1.2 on page 33 of your textbook and know and understand each one of these 10 specific roles that effective managers must undertake in their daily activities. Each one of these roles is concerned with influencing the behavior of people inside and outside of the organization. And what I like to do here is I like to describe Mintzberg's managerial skills and roles sort of as a manager having to wear many, many hats. As a manager, you will have to bounce from one role or one skill set to another, sometimes within a matter of seconds. And it's really important that you understand the 3 broad categories and the roles that fall within those 3 broad categories of interpersonal, informational, and decisional roles that managers must make. So one more time, I'm going to ask you to take a look at this table, read it, and understand it. If you're having any difficulty with this, I encourage you to come and see me well before the test so that you have a strong understanding of this going into it. Now to summarize. So what is management? Well, a manager is responsible for supervising the use of resources to meet organizational goals. And an organization is a group of people working together to achieve those goals. So a manager has to juggle all of these different things. They have to use organizations' resources to achieve the goals effectively and efficiently through the 4 functions of management: planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. Those 4 main functions that I just talked about, managers at all levels have to perform these functions, but in varying degrees. The higher you go up on that management period, the more time you're going to spend on planning and organizing. The lower you are on that pyramid, the more time you're going to spend leading the employees that are helping you to achieve these goals. Effective management means being able to approach all of these activities at varying degrees of success. Managers are characterized by level and by function. So as I mentioned before, the functions typically include what they do within an organization and can be categorized into things like marketing, operations, human resources, accounting and finance, research and development. All of these are subjects that you are taking this semester. All of them represent major functions or actions within an organization that help to make it successful. And even within those functions, those areas of expertise, organizations typically have 3 levels of management. There are first-line managers that are right at the bottom, and they're responsible for the day-to-day operations of an organization. Middle managers, who oversee first-line managers and are somewhat involved in the planning process and controlling process. And top managers, who are more involved in the planning and organizing functions of management. The values, attitudes, moods, and emotions of a manager affects the organizational culture or the personality of the organization. And this also shapes how managers plan, organize, lead, and control those resources to achieve goals. An organization that embraces an innovative culture, they're a little more flexible, a little bit more organic, a little bit more welcome and equal, has a different way of approaching planning, organizing, leading, and controlling than an organization that has a much more conventional or rigid structure, like the military, for example. Organizational socialization are kind of how we introduce new employees to our organization so that they can now learn what's expected of them. And once they know that, then they can be able to perform their jobs accordingly and effectively. And finally, 3 types of skills that help managers perform their roles effectively are conceptual skills, the ability to be able to see a bigger picture, human skills or interpersonal skills, being a people person, and technical skills, understanding how things work. Within that, and within understanding that, Mintzberg identified that a manager can wear many, many hats throughout the course of their day, their week, their month, or their year. Managers must play what he categorized to be 10 specific roles in their daily activities, and they range from figurehead to negotiator. So that's it for chapter 1, and now you're all caught up. When we get back together on Monday, we're going to begin immediately on chapter 2, but I also want to remind you, I did ask you that one question that I'm going to start class with. Is restructuring necessary? Is it evil? Or is it a necessary evil? Please be prepared to answer that question. Have a great weekend. Don't forget to finish your quiz, and we will see you on Monday.